A new chapter in the Alien saga is coming. After Alien, Romulus revitalized the iconic sci-fi franchise's big-screen fortunes on both a critical and a commercial level. It comes as no surprise that Alien, Romulus 2 is happening. Fede Alvarez, director of the 2024 effort, has been involved in developing the sequel script, but will pass directorial duties onto an as-yet unnamed replacement. Regardless, all indications point toward Alien, Romulus 2 continuing its predecessor's story, especially after Kelly Speeney's reign and David Johnson's Andy survived Alien, Romulus' otherwise bloody ending. Given the popularity of those characters, the sequel's direction makes total sense and comes as encouraging news, but it does also leave a lingering franchise problem frustratingly unresolved. Ridley Scott's Alien prequel story remains unfinished. Ridley Scott's return to the Alien franchise with Prometheus and Alien Covenant was, let's say, unconventional. Prometheus proved especially unique in stepping away from the typical Alien formula, barely even connecting to the existing story on an overt level. Alien Covenant restored some missing franchise tropes, but still deepened the mysteries set up by Scott's preceding installment. Perhaps as a consequence, Scott's prequels didn't immediately strike a chord in the same way Alien, Romulus has, attracting a far more divisive response. Fortunately, time has soothed those wounds. Subsequent rewatches have been kind to both Prometheus and Alien Covenant, and by not expecting a typical Alien movie, one can appreciate both films for what Scott intended them to be. Quite what Ridley Scott did intend, however, remains somewhat unclear. The ending of Alien Covenant left a whole heap of questions unanswered. Chiefly, the engineers, a race that added an entire tome to Alien canon. These hairless folk were responsible for human life on Earth, and also intended to wipe us out before their scheme was interrupted. Why do the engineers do what they do? Where did they originally come from? What is their true connection to the xenomorphs? Why was humanity supposed to be wiped out? All of these plot threads still dangle tantalizingly after Alien Covenant, and while the answers to some can be guessed, the engineers probably didn't appreciate humans being so violent and decided to delete us. For example, it would be nice to have the solutions on screen. Then there's Michael Fassbender's David and his slow-burning master plan. By the end of Alien Covenant, we can infer that David seeks to create a race of xenomorphs to rule over as a god, but his victory felt like the setup for another movie where David attempts to fulfill his vision and is, presumably, thwarted by heroes. There's the xenomorphs themselves too. Prometheus and Alien Covenant muddied the waters regarding where the creatures first came from. It seems they started as a natural species before being reverse-engineered by the engineers, then again by David, but viewers are once again filling in the blanks somewhat. Why Ridley Scott's unfinished prequels hurt Alien Romulus 2? If Alien Covenant feels like the middle chapter in a larger story, that's because it was designed as such. In 2015, Ridley Scott spoke openly about his intention to make 2, perhaps 3, further prequels following Prometheus, via film footage. The lukewarm reception afforded to Alien Covenant caused those plans to gradually fizzle out over the subsequent 5 years or so. Come the 2020s and Disney's acquisition of Fox, thoughts turned to a more traditional Alien movie, eventually leading to the development of Alien Romulus. Ridley Scott has since given rather mixed messages concerning his future as it pertains to chest-bursting cinema. Reports in late 2024 announced a new Alien movie from Ridley Scott. In conversation with Screen Rant a little over 6 months later, Scott himself stated, "I think I've done enough," when asked about returning to the Alien world. By August, Scott gave a different answer, another Alien prequel, "Yeah, if I get an idea, for sure." Usually, a franchise as massive as Alien would be able to balance multiple stories at once without any narrative issues, but Scott's prequels are so embedded into the, literal, DNA of the franchise, their lack of completion inevitably has a knock-on effect. It would be an exaggeration to say that the lack of a third prequel somehow made Alien Romulus a lesser movie, but the distraction was certainly impossible to get away from. With so many questions about the very nature of the xenomorphs, and David presumably still lurking in the shadows, it was tricky to view Alien Romulus for the first time without having Prometheus mysteries in mind and hoping for potential solutions. Fede Alvarez acknowledged this with the inclusion of Prometheus black goo, but, ultimately, that wasn't his story to tell. Now, Alien Romulus 2 will face the same obstacle. As fans, we have a natural inclination to join the dots, to take the older movies we love and knot their lore into newer releases, thus avoiding the classic material becoming irrelevant. Arguably, it should be the job of any long-running IP to make sure those dots are joined for audiences, otherwise what separates a shared universe, which Alien is, from a total reboot? Until Ridley Scott finishes mapping out the foundation.